Well,
And
hello
welcome
and
to
welcome to this newest installment of A Few Minutes With. And it's my joy today to have the priest and writer and Lent Madness celebrity blogger and
distinguished.
distinguished
That
Lent
means that
Madness.
we don't ever get to not do it.
Congratulations, I guess.
Mhm.
But above all, my longtime friend, Laurie Brock. Laurie, it's great to have you and it's great to see you. It's been a while since we've had a chance to catch up.
Yeah, great to be here. Excited to see you via Zoom. That's the way I see everybody these days, and everybody else is seeing everybody.
Well, for those that don't know, you are the rector of the Church of St. Michael the Archangel in Lexington, Kentucky. It's a beautiful parish that I was able to visit a few times over the years. And like every other congregation, you're dealing with some significant adjustments. And so I wanted to begin by asking you how the congregation's doing with the adjustment. And in the midst of all this, have any surprise gifts popped out or popped up among the parishioners that you didn't even know were there?
I think that probably like most people, and um, St. Michael's is adapting. I don't know that I would hear anybody say that they're enjoying this time, but I think they're adapting. I think as Christians, the fact that we have language about sacrifice matters. This is a time of sacrifice. We are having to stay home. We are having to do things in ways that we would rather not do them, and we are doing them so that other people stay healthy and that we have time for our healthcare professionals to be in the position they need to be, to keep us as healthy as possible. So I think that one of the things that I value about my faith is that we do have language about sacrifice that we can talk about, and but we also have language about a God who is with us in all times and in all places. And so that those have become themes that I try to lift up in all of my electronic communications. I actually was not the first Sunday, because the Bishop of Washington was the first one to close churches, and then Bishop Mark was the second one. And so I was part of sort of that early conversation, and I just remember thinking, like, this would be easier if somebody else would do it first, or it was a cascade. But he was really early. Our Governor Andy Beshear has been really proactive and very early, and so we were having to kind of make decisions before other things were. Now, by the time Mark made the decision, the NBA and the NCAA, like, things happened really fast after that. But when he made that decision, that had not been made yet. And I actually wasn't going to do a digital service the first Sunday. I was just going to say, hey, here's the prayer book, and open it. And one of my assisting priest, who is retired, said, "You are like one of the digital people in the diocese, and if you don't do it, I thought, great. So now I have a reputation to uphold." So we did a Facebook Live. It was not an unmitigated disaster, but it was just, I was like, we're not doing live again. But I have a parishioner who is a woodworker and who makes beautiful woodwork and prayer bowls. I'm happy to send pictures to anybody who wants it. But he, in that, does a lot of filming as he's crafting things. And he said, "I have this equipment. I'd love to come help." And I can tell you that the two parishioners who come, we film on Saturday mornings, who do that. They do the quiet, slow work of God. That is because with all that I'm having to do and all that other people, the idea of filming and editing is not what I would want to do. So I'm so thankful for people, for those parishioners who are doing that. I'm my choir director. The choir director, music is such an important part of this church. So it was pretty important to me, if we could, to get that implement. She has been amazing. We have a soloist that comes and sings, so we have music to our morning prayer. So those, I think, just watching people offer, and now we're stepping into, hey, would you like to be a lector? So, film yourself and then send it in, and we'll edit it in. So finding those ways, and I think one of the gifts of this for me is, it is okay to learn as you go. I think after we hit a certain age, we like to know everything and do everything perfectly and right. And we want to have it all looking good before it goes out in public. And I think this whole process, especially for video church, has been a learn as you go. And, let's try this. And how does this work? And some of it works and some of it doesn't. But just that permission to be faithful, to be authentic and vulnerable in this time, and to let people know we're figuring this out too. But also, I think people just need to remember that they are not praying alone, Yeah. So, my congregation skews a little younger than the average Episcopal congregation, but we do have members who are retirement age. And so technology is a little different for them, but they're hanging in there. And, but we're figuring it out. And I've got great volunteers. Just the amount of people who have shown up and said, what can I do? What needs to be done? Whether it's detergent that needs to go to some of the schools that are in more fragile economic areas in our country, in our community,
right?
To two members of our floral guild who said, if we're going to film for Easter, the church is going to have some flowers, and to be able to continue not our full order, but some of our order from our local florist. And those things, that economic witness is important for churches too, when and if we can afford it. So.
Well, and you mentioned just now the vulnerability that we're all feeling in branching out into this new area. And I was reminded, and in fact, I think there was a meme that ran around for a bit, that at the end of the day, as much as we want to be Cecil B. DeMille and do a 10 Commandment style production, at the end of the day, people just want to see us.
Yeah, they want to see it. They want to hear. I think they want to hear our voices. They want to hear the prayers they've heard. I miss celebrating the Eucharist. For my congregation, I've made the decision that I celebrate the Eucharist again when we all celebrate it together.
Yep.
I know there are congregations who've made different decisions, and I trust that, make the decision that your congregation needs you to make, not the decision that the clergy on Twitter are yelling about. Because they don't know your people. And that was one of the early parts of this. Was a retired priest told me, you know your people better than any other priest does. I trust that you know them. And that, again, that's hard, because I want a book. I want some rubrics on this, and they're just not any, to a great extent.
Yeah. Well, let me shift gears. I mentioned at the outset that you're an author, and your second book, Horses Speak of God, is beautiful. I've been struggling lately to put words to things, and beautiful is the one that I came up with. And I spent time this week rereading it, and actually found that a lot of what you talk about in there is even more powerful and more relevant in the time that we find ourselves in now. But before I get into that, I want to ask you, you talk in the introduction about how God nudged you back to horses, and you talk in the book about experiences you had as a child and not being able to ride and feeling left out, and then getting to a point where it didn't interest you, but you still felt God kind of pushing you in that direction. And out of that, you were pushed and nudged to write this book. So where did you feel that transfer from the time God put you back on a horse to putting you behind a computer to write this book out?
Part of it was my spiritual director actually was part of that, because I would talk about a situation, and then I would say, and then this is what I would do on a horse. I was connecting challenging situations or things I was trying to unknot in my own personal spiritual life. Mm-hmm. And I was connecting them with horses. And she said, have you ever thought of writing some of those down? Because, the way that you connect those is clearly helpful to you. And I wonder if it'd be helpful to somebody else. And I sort of remember thinking, I haven't been writing long enough to do that, which was true, by the way. And so, and then I was at a writing conference, and Amy Frickholm, who wrote a beautiful book about Julian of Norwich that I adore, and I were talking, and I mentioned something about toying around with the idea of writing about what I had learned about faith through horses. And she said, "Oh, I think that's a great book. And here's my editor. I don't think the book is going to be okay for their publishing house, but I think she can give you feedback." And so emailed her editor, and her editor said, I wish we could publish it. It's not for our house, but Paraclete is really good. And so that's how it happened. So, again, the value of encouragement from somebody who says, "Have you ever thought about this?"
Oh, it's enormous. And it sounds like God was nudging you through other people, and not even directly, which is always
Always. Yeah.
One of the early chapters is called Movement. And I'll say, for folks that haven't read the book, each chapter relates to an aspect of horsemanship and horseback riding. But in this particular one, you talk about movement together with the horse and maintaining balance and not having what you call a stiff neck, and being flexible and sensitive and open. And you tied it into the almost inherent inflexibility that we as human beings have about faith and about life, and how easy it is to forget sometimes that movement and change are all part of life. And in fact, you mentioned that change is a word that people embrace intellectually, but emotionally they're quick to push it off. And now we find ourselves in a point where we've been forced to change, and we've been forced to be flexible. Do you think this is something that, just from your experience and your encounters with your parishioners or others, is something that will be long lasting, or do you think there's going to be a snapback effect to, being resistant to that change again once it's not being thrust on people? I didn't say I was going to make it easy on you.
Yeah, none of us like change. Well, I would say we all like change as long as it doesn't involve loss. But my experience is change always involves some loss, whether we know what that loss is or don't. And I think what feels so overwhelming about this situation, or one of the many things, is that we didn't really have any say in this. Like it wasn't like we said, well, gosh, yeah, Alex, I'll have global pandemic for 500. Like, we didn't select this one. This showed up at our door. It showed up at our door fairly quickly. I remember first hearing about it in December. So, I mean, there's, and then by mid-March, we're in quarantine essentially. So, I mean, and I think the hard part of change is it gives us time to figure out what wasn't working beforehand. Mm-hmm. The challenge about that is was it really not working? Yeah, I mean, and I talk about that in terms of, addiction is sort of a clear place to go. One of my friends who's been in recovery, and she likes to say, since Jesus was in elementary school, is that she says, alcohol always works until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And then something has to happen generally for you to realize, oh, this isn't working anymore. Whether you lose your job or you're in prison or whatever. So I kind of guess what I'm curious about is to see what do we decide isn't working, that we were doing before. And I don't know what all those things are. I suspect and maybe hope that we will decide, maybe as valuable as digital ministry is, and communication is, as wonderful as it is that I can text friends of mine or FaceTime, I wonder if I will value those face-to-face encounters a little more than I did beforehand. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, I think that the hardest part, when we talk about movement of riding horses, when I'm riding one, I don't have a lot of time to reflect on the great themes of it. I'm on this horse, and if it's a particularly hot horse or a particularly game horse, I have to be really present in that moment. And the thing that I'm aware of is that I don't, in that moment, think about the meaning of what's going on. My purpose is to stay on that horse, and my purpose is to get that horse to go or do what I need that horse to do in a way that that horse feels like the need to cooperate. Only after the fact do I reflect on, what did I learn from that? What's the bigger narrative there?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess part of it is I'm always cautious about trying to find meaning when we are on the horse, and we are right now, and right now I think we're using the tools we have to stay on this horse. And probably I hope finding tools that we need, because most of us are still in places of reaching out for help and those things. So what I think about the change is that when we get done with this, whatever that looks like, whether that's 6 months or 2 years or whatever the numbers are, that then we'll give ourselves permission to think, now what about this? Like, what was the meaning? What did we learn? So that was a very long answer to your question, but
Well,
my sense is that ride the horse right now. Do what you need to do to be safe, to be in a relationship in this space right now, and then when you're done, and on the ground standing, and you're giving the horse the care because it did a good job, then you can take a breath and go, what I learned about that.
Well, and as you were answering that, I was thinking too, because throughout the book you're talking, and I'm not a horse rider. In fact, the 2 times I tried it, the last time was 1988, and the horse basically said, "This guy's an idiot. I'm just going back to the stable," and that's what we did. So I don't have experience, but in the book you talk about how sensitive horses are to how tightly you're holding the reins, and just the slightest shift in where your heel or your calf is, or where you're leaning in the saddle, and trying to register whether a horse is about to buck or something. And hearing you talk about that, I was thinking, maybe that's what we should be doing with our congregations and our faith communities and our friends, even that aren't part of our faith communities, is being sensitive to how tightly we're, to use the language from your book, how tightly or loosely we're holding the reins with them, or how sensitive they are to slight shifts that we may be making in the way we're riding in the saddle or holding our feet in the stirrups.
And part of that awareness starts with us. How tightly wound are we? How stressed are we? Because my grandmother always loved to say, you can't give away what you don't have. And I think that, so, we can't be non-anxious presences if we're all stressed out, and this is kind of an appropriate time to be stressed out. So, what does that look like? And what does it look like when the tools that we have, like right now, I relate this to like riding a horse when one of your stirrups breaks or your rein snap or something goes wrong, because this is not the normal way we ride horses. I don't, as a priest, I am physically in the space with people if they're having a crisis to talk to them. I lay hands on people for prayer and healing. I celebrate the Eucharist and share that with my congregation. And those tools are not available to me right now.
Yeah.
I can't be in that same physical space. So I got to figure out, to belabor the horse metaphor, I've got to figure out now how to ride this horse without some crucial tools that I use. And I think part of that is trusting our ability that God has put us here and has equipped us with what we need. And can we be still enough and faithful enough to believe that we have those tools?
Reaching for God for stability in the same way that if you're falling off the horse, you grab for the mane.
Grab the mane.
Grab the mane and give you some stability. Something else that's changed with all this, and I want to read a quote from your book, is the subject of boundaries. And, you wrote a wonderful chapter in here that actually can be pronounced 2 ways. It's collect in terms of collecting the horse that people can read about, but then collect in terms of the prayers that kind of bring things together at the beginning of some of our liturgies. But in that chapter, you wrote this about boundaries, and I'd like to read it real quick. Too many people, moments, ideas, and issues pulling my head forward and down. Too many times of hearing my name followed by, "Can I ask you a question?" taking my energy. Too many emails and text messages that keep my feet stuck in mud. limiting my forward movement into a day off and time away from work. I am at the same time racing to meet the demands I put on myself and others place on my life, and incapacitated by the cement around the expectations of these same demands. I feel scattered and unbalanced, too much of me pulled forward by the expectations of others, and too little of my own energy grounding me to God. The first time I read that, when the book came out, I read it as a priest. And when I read it again this week, I read it as a human, somebody that's struggling with all this. And boundaries are being redefined. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier as far as change, and especially unexpected change. Do you, if you had to guess, and I love asking these $1,000,000 questions that there's no answer for, but do you think people will be more sensitive to boundaries going forward, knowing how valuable they are, whether they're self-imposed or imposed upon us by situations like this?
Oh, no. I generally think that humans, we struggle with boundaries, because I think we are communal, and I think that those boundaries are going to get really wonderfully and beautifully messy when we can hug each other and be with each other, and I missed you, and let's go out to dinner, and let's go to coffee, and let's all these things we can't do now. So I think that they'll be wonderfully blurred. And then I think they'll be changed. I think that probably for the first time for a lot of us, we suddenly pay attention to distance. Like when I walk my dog 300 times a day, or I'm very aware of where people are. For me, I think the shift in the boundary is I'm suddenly aware how other people have. I've stepped a little out of where I reside. How many people do we encounter in our lives and in our congregations who, because of their fragile health, cannot go out into public because even a cold would do serious damage to them. Mm-hmm. And so they can't go to the grocery store. And, how many people that we know because of physical disabilities can't easily leave their homes.
Right.
And how many people, I wonder what, those, so to me, kind of that boundary is, wow, there's ones I wasn't even aware. I mean, I was aware of it, but not in a particularly present way, the way I am now. Mm-hmm. I've actually kind of wondered if agoraphobia is going to become a real issue where people just don't want anybody around because it's so scary. Mm-hmm. I was saying the other day to a clergy colleague that, we don't have anybody around who lived through the Spanish flu epidemic. I mean, we have narratives, but, I wonder what that was like to sort of say, oh, you can come out now. I'm not heightened to believe that, quite honestly, oh, well, okay. So I think that boundaries will get messy. I think boundaries are harder to keep now for me because my response to anxiety is generally to overfunction. And this is just this is a field ripe for that, because suddenly, people can't come into the office and I'm having to do all the newsletters and everything, so I'm having to do stuff I did. And I'm having to walk back from that. Like I find, yesterday I took off. Okay, I need 24 hours of downtime. Mm-hmm. So I think clergy particularly are going to be really bad at keeping boundaries because we are anyway, I think. And I think we're going to need to remember that we can't love somebody through 3 months of quarantine. We can't make up for the lost time, that we can be present to where we are. And I think to remember, we have to take care of ourselves too. I really hope that all clergy right now have either a therapist or a spiritual director or somebody that they are talking with about where they are. I hope that that clergy are taking time off and caregivers are taking time off,
Mm-hmm.
whether those people are in healthcare or whatever, I hope parents are giving themselves a break. I cannot imagine being a parent right now with all these new rules. And I have said to my congregation, if your kids have all their fingers and toes that they started this with, you win. Like, they don't need to learn another language. They don't need to read War and Peace, and I think what I hope is that the boundaries become kinder to ourselves, that we find grace in that space. I did laugh because that chapter was the one that I start out when the Keurig, and it died 3 days ago. And I was standing in front of it, and I was like, I could feel myself like start to hit meltdown mode. And I was like, oh, wait, the church has a Keurig and nobody's using it. So the church Keurig is now in my house, because we have them, and going to the grocery store is a little uncomfortable. And the coffee shop where I buy my coffee from is closed. So there's that.
Well, I want to end with one thing. James Lipton was always famous in his interviews of asking people, if you get to the pearly gates and God's there, what do you think God will say to you? If somebody comes up to you in an elevator, distance from 6 feet, but in an elevator nonetheless, what would you say to them in 30 seconds as something to strengthen them during this time?
Are they 6 feet away from me?
Six or more.
They're 6 or more feet away from me. Oh, I would say the thing that I've been telling my congregation: God is with us and we are with each other. Mm-hmm. And we are with each other. We are, and God is with us, and not just a toss off, but, I am amazed by the number of times in a day that I can stop and think, because it's that point. I'm at that point where I ask myself, where did I see God today? Mm-hmm. Because I can feel so busy that I forget to do that. And, just that point of stopping and thinking, oh, I saw God today because a friend of mine texted me, that Grantchester was going to come back, or just those things, or, oh, Call the Midwife was on. So now I get to cry every Sunday, have therapeutic cry time. But I think that what do we do every day to remember that God is with us? And what do we do to remember that we are with each other? And what do we do to be part of that narrative? Not to just let love happen to us, which it does, but how are we agents of love? And right now, we have no idea. I mean, I know what it's like to just get an email from a parishioner that says, gosh, that Easter service was great, because I was making it all up, or to have somebody drop off, chocolate. I mean, just those things matter. And I think they matter more because that's the only communication we really have now. Yeah. We're not running into each other on the street. So yeah, that God is with us. We are with each other. And how are we active in that space of being with?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I know this probably isn't, well, I know it's not the first place you're going to be able to announce this, but I think putting your author hat back on, I think you've got a little news to share, and I'm going to pretend like this is the first time you've shared it with anybody.
Are you going to? Yeah, because I really haven't. I mean, I got the news like the first or 1,000th week in quarantine. But I signed a contract, so I will be Paraclete, which is the publisher of Horses Speak of God. I had to write the title down because I'll forget it. The Long Way Home: Encountering God in Unusual Places. And so, ironically, it's about encountering God in different places that I've traveled, whether they be across the world or down the street. So we shall see what that looks like. And I do want to put a plug in for buying books right now through local bookstores, through publishers. I mean, go to the publisher website, go to Paraclete Press, go to small publishing houses. They are hurting. Everybody is. And this is a great time to discover a new book. But please, please I mean, my heart breaks for authors who I know had book launches scheduled during this time. And, you know, so if you can go to websites, if you can buy books, share on Facebook, social media, wonderful books you've read. I constantly am discovering books because people I know on Twitter or whatever said, oh, this is a great book. Or so I just cannot say enough about supporting particularly small independent presses right now, because the publishing industry is one of those essential industries, in my opinion. Can you imagine a world without books?
No.
And I want us to have as many of those publishing houses on the other side of this as we do now. So, so even if you think, you know, oh, I don't want to buy a book, or do your Christmas shopping now, you know, like buy a bunch of books for people. Christmas is now less than 9 months away. So I think, I can't remember. I don't do math anymore. So give or take. So, you know, I just think that, you know, buy local as you can, support local businesses, because I think, to me, that is a way that we can have a purpose right now. And I mean, I know that just, it feels good to me when I can go out and safely get food from a local business or order from our local bookstore. So I have a sense that I'm trying to do what I can. That may not be helpful for everybody, and some people are, but I thankfully am in a position where I have some shekels that can go that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Laurie, it was great catching up with you. I really appreciate your time, and I hope everybody in Lexington does buy a book, because the next time out there, you have to take me back to that same bookstore you and I go to every time I'm out there to see you.
Oh, you know, we've lost 2 of our independent bookstores now. So, so they've closed, but there's still some very good ones. And there's still the bookstore at Gethsemane, which is always fun to go to.
Yes,
because
there's a trip unto itself.
Yeah, it's always so. But yes, thank you. Be safe. Good to see you. Thanks for the interview. And hopefully we'll see you sooner rather than later in person.
Absolutely. God bless.
Bye.